I went to Holy Rosary, a small private school, for my first few years of Catholic schooling from 1957 to 1975. I learned a lot in those early years, and by the second grade, I was acting as an altar boy. Father Constantino, my minister, thought I was meant to be a priest. But even though he told me to do it, I felt a strong pull toward something else. A simple, happy Catholic life called me, not becoming a priest. Following high school, I went to Housatonic Community College, where my interests grew in areas other than faith. Life After Life, a book by Dr. Raymond Moody that looked into the idea of near-death experiences, NDs, was read in language class. At first, these stories seemed like nothing more than fantasies, things that were made up instead of real events. But instead of ignoring them, I became interested in the puzzle. As I learned more about NDs, science fiction lost its appeal for me. I read a lot of books by psychologists and therapists over the years, including those by Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and Dr. Brian Weiss. It wasn't just authors making up stories. These were scholars with impressive qualifications from well-known schools. For example, Dr. Weiss used to be the head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami. Another great name in this field was Dr. Kubler-Ross, the groundbreaking psychotherapist who came up with the idea of the 7 stages of grief. These professionals had held on to common ideas for decades, some for as long as 30 years, before their views started to change. At first, like many people in the medical field, they thought that NDs were just side effects of drugs, dreams, or mental tricks. They tried to find scientific reasons for these experiences in the hopes that medicine would one day make them less mysterious. But as they tried to learn more in the 1970s and 1980s, the explanations they were looking for stayed out of reach. At that time, mental hospitals were ready to look into NDs, but some doctors in places like Battle Creek, Michigan, were against the idea. Even so, more and more doctors started to share their stories, and some of them had their own NDs. Doctors like Dr. Ibn Alexander and Dr. Michael Savam talked about their experiences and insisted that they were not drug-induced illusions, but real intense experiences that were different from normal dreams and hallucinations. By January 1998, more people were speaking out, not just doctors, but also people like Anita Moorjani and Betty Eadie. These non-medical people talked about their near-death experiences and said they proved God, love, and the existence of a future. Their stories added more depth to the talk. It seemed that modern medicine, which had come a long way in the 1950s and 1960s, was saving more people from death by accident, which in turn made it possible to explore life after death. Despite all of this, the 1990s made me realize that I was going to die. It started with headaches that seemed harmless, but wouldn't go away. In the beginning, I didn't think much of them, just another bothersome thing to deal with. Then the news came. He had a brain tumor. My doctor thought it probably began to grow around 1994 or 1995, but by December 1997, it was dangerously big, fist-sized, and covering half my head. They said surgery was planned right away because the tumor was aggressive and would have killed the person if it wasn't treated. I was shocked at first, but I didn't fully understand how bad things were. I had had surgery on my intestines, tonsils, and even my knees before. It seemed like this was just another process. Doctors were worried about seizures, but I didn't know that until they brought it up in the emergency room. Since I had never been through one, I didn't know how important their questions were. I still didn't understand how bad things were as I waited for my wife in the emergency room. My thoughts were cloudy and my mind was foggy. The doctors didn't seem eager to explain it to me. It made no sense to me why they told me not to drive home. Why wasn't I able to leave right away? They talked about getting ready for the hospital, which seemed like another response to something I thought was a normal process. Then another Italian, Dr. Fiorara, showed up. We got along because we were both from the same country, but quickly the subject turned to why I was there. He looked surprised when I told him. It was clear that no one had told me how bad my condition was. I had headaches, stumbling, and sometimes I couldn't even find the words, and he told me straight out that I had a fist-sized brain tumor. The full weight of my situation didn't hit me until I met with Dr. Hitchcock the next morning. The growth of the tumor had been stopped for years, even though it was much bigger than most. I was in a fight for my life, not just another surgery. Dr. Fiorara left me to go make his rounds in the emergency room, but not before offering to answer any other questions I might have or just let me wait for my wife. Because I was still thinking about how big what he had just said was, I chose to wait. Not long after, I saw her walk down the hall with a serious look on her face. I smiled as she came in. I held on tight to that smile like it was lifesaver as I told her what Dr. Fiorora had said about the tumor and the appointment with Dr. Hitchcock that was coming up. I couldn't read her face as she listened, but I could feel the weight she carried. She didn't understand why I was so upbeat and didn't seem to be affected by the news at all. My attitude was very different from hers in terms of how serious she was. I told her that a brain tumor could be surgically handled and that this wasn't an emotional load that we couldn't carry. Oh, it's just a lump, I said, still holding on to that tiny bit of hope. They'll take it down and we'll see what happens. We were feeling unsure as we left the emergency room and went home. We went to see Dr. Hitchcock in his office near Swedish Hospital the next morning, where he did surgeries. The way he acted was calm and focused. He showed the MRAs to show how bad things were. The tumor was huge, bigger than any other tumor he had ever seen. I told him the truth about my chances of life and asked for more information about what could go wrong. Worse, what if I woke up drooling or got a lobotomy? The answer from Dr. Hitchcock was careful and almost evasive. He told me that brain surgeries were hard to plan for. No matter how hard I tried, he couldn't give me clear answers. I was getting angry, so I asked him for a rough guess. Anything to hold on to. But he wouldn't guess. It was clear that he only meant to do his best and not give me false hope. As we talked more, I asked if it would be possible to put off the surgery until late January or early February. He was sure that time was against us, though, Dr. Hitchcock informed us. The growth was very dangerous because it was growing so fast. It was very clear from what he said how bad things were. The risks were getting worse every day. The harsh truth hit me then. In the event that I do not have surgery, I may not arrive in June. I wished I had more time, but Dr. Hitchcock made it clear that we could not put off the operation. I later told a doctor friend about my fears. I felt very sad when I thought about dying around Christmas. My daughter was only a year old, and I honestly couldn't stand the thought of her forever connecting the holidays with my passing. By moving the surgery to late January or early February, I thought that we could keep her from having to deal with that painful connection. It was clear to Dr. Hitchcock that I was worried. To lower the risks of operation even more, he told me to give blood regularly, so I did that every Friday before the surgery. I stuck to the hope that this would work and that things would get better in the end. Surgery did happen in the end, and it was an event that changed everything. As the painkillers put me to sleep, I drifted off into another world, a beautiful, peaceful, ethereal scenery. A friend from another world walked with me and led me to a group of buildings where I would meet my master. We would decide what I should do next. Even though I was scared at first about the idea of a possible life review, I quickly understood that it wasn't yet my time. As my guide and I got closer to the meeting place, I was given the option to either go back to my body and raise the child that hadn't been born yet or to move on. It was November 1999 when that child, my son, was born. This experience showed me the way I had decided to go before I was even born. I had the chance to leave in 1997, but my promise to my son to be his parent through life made me refuse to give up on my journey. That promise that I would be there for him and help him keep it stood strong. He's now 22 years old, a junior in college, and the personification of the future I dreamed of in that otherworldly place. In that surreal field with my guide, I knew I was starting my way back. I remember waking up at 2 a.m., sleepy and hooked up to a respirator in the ICU. The details of that return are fuzzy now. That experience taught me more about the other side of the veil than all the studying I had done over the years. For 40 years, studying near-death experiences has been a constant source of learning and growth for me. I think this will always be the case, and I am grateful and amazed by it. This is the end of this part of my story, but the trip goes on. Kindly tell me what you think in the space below. Safe travels and many blessings until next time.